Well, good morning or good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the IPO Education Foundation annual award celebration series. You've joined the series component called For Richer or Poorer, Cryptocurrency, Non-Fungible Tokens, which you'll hear us use the term in the next hour, NFTs, Non-Fungible Tokens, and Current Topics in Financial Technology, you'll hear the term Fintech, and Intellectual Property. I am moderator for this panel, Dave Kapos, and let me start by introducing three fantastic speakers that we've got here today for what I hope will be a really engaging discussion about a topic that's just exploding daily in the news. So in alphabetical order, we've got Brian Fry. Brian is the Spears Gilbert Professor of Law at the University of Kentucky College of Law. And Brian, welcome and thank you for joining us today. We've got second in alphabetical order, Rob Glantz. Rob is the Senior Vice President and Managing Counsel of the Intellectual Property Group at Wells Fargo. So banking industry help here. And then third in alphabetical order, we've got Cindy Huang, who is Senior Corporate Counsel for Intellectual Property at Gemini. All three of these speakers have deep skills in this space coming from diverse directions. So we're just really pleased to be able to have the discussion that we'll have here today. So what we're going to do is start by giving each speaker an opportunity to speak for a few minutes about their take on this area of not just blockchain, but with a focus, this panel on fintech, and especially crypto and non-fungible tokens, which have become just such hot topics. We'll just go in alphabetical order and turn it over to you first, Brian, to take us through your interest in this area.
Great. Well, so I got interested in non-fungible tokens, NFTs, and in these new markets that are emerging around them based on my own interests in intellectual property theory, specifically concepts around plagiarism, an interest in the intersection of intellectual property and the art markets, and then more specifically, an interest in trying to do conceptual artwork in the form of legal scholarship. So several years ago, I did a paper called SEC No Action Letter Request, which was a law review article that took the form of a prospectus for the sale of a work of conceptual art titled SEC No Action Letter Request, which consisted of me sending a no action letter request to the SEC proposing to sell a work of conceptual art titled No Action Letter Request, explaining to them the different features of the project in question, how I was fractionalizing it, how I was going to market it to potential buyers, how I was going to make sure that the value depended on the future market for the work in question, so on and so forth, explaining why it was that what I was doing satisfied all the criteria for the sale of an unregistered security, and asking them as a consequence to deny my no action letter request. To no one's great surprise, the SEC did not respond to my no action letter request. I was told it probably went into the crank file. But there was a lot of discussion around it, including by people like Matt Levine of Money Stuff, who thought it was very amusing, but also was quite convinced that what I was doing was not selling a security, in large part because no one would be interested in buying it, which at the time was true. Fast forward 6 months and the NFT market exploded. And I thought to myself, wait a minute, I was selling people nothing. And now there's an entire market of people very excited to buy nothing. And so I created, on a lark, I created NFTs of this project. So they're translating in a kind of offline or off-chain conceptual art project into an on-chain NFT-based project that effectively worked in exactly the same way. Sent a second no action letter request to the SEC, explaining how I had activated the project, as it were, by tapping into an existing market for which I expected people to actually purchase the work of conceptual art that I was selling, and observing that since they didn't seem to have any problem with the last project, they probably wouldn't have any problem with this one either. So I would just take it on faith that I could go ahead and do it without their permission, and subsequently sold the 50, I believe it was, edition, maybe 40 or 50 editions of this work of conceptual art for a total sum of about $20,000, which felt like it was enough of a return on my investment of zero to constitute the sale of an unregistered security. So I got interested in thinking about NFTs that way. At first, I thought they were a joke, and then I realized there was something really interesting and unusual taking place here, and have spent the last several months trying to figure out exactly what that is to the best of my ability, get some sense of why people are interested in them, what they're tapping into that we didn't previously understand, and to figure out what this new market means for the future of the IP landscape.
Wow, that is amazing. And so did you get a response, a no action response from the SEC to the second letter?
The SEC would rather I don't exist. I think part of the interesting problem here is that I'm asking the SEC questions it really doesn't want to answer right now. Because really what the big picture part of the project is, thinking about securitization in relation to this kind of art practice, which I think is, embedded in the conversation around NFTs. They really expose the extent to which long-term market-based value necessarily applies the potential for conceptualizing property in security-based terms. But really the observation is that when we think about a security in a kind of ontological sense, as in, is it or is it not a security? I think that's actually a category error. Because what we really should be asking is it the kind of thing that the SEC believes it should be regulating as a security? And I actually think that that's a much more interesting, difficult, and complicated question that kind of reflects the broader social context in which the SEC goes about conceptualizing its own role in regulating the securities markets in relation to what it thinks it's supposed to be doing and why, and what kinds of things it thinks falls inside and outside of its purview.
Sorry, David, this is just so fascinating. Yeah, that I feel like I need to follow up with another question. So I think of the traditional so-called Howey test that the SEC has long used from the old court opinion to determine whether some offering constitutes a security. And I would have thought that, Brian, what you're describing would meet the Howey test. Do you feel like, just at that kind of technical legal level, like it clearly does or clearly doesn't?
I think if you take the Howey test at face value, you can make anything fit the definition of a security.
Okay, fair enough. That's one of the concerns with it, yeah.
Right. But in my particular case, what I'm essentially doing is saying that in the conceptual art market, and frankly, in the art market writ large, anytime you invest in a work of artwork, what you're really investing in is the future celebrity of that artist's career. So what I like to say is anytime you buy a work of artwork, what you're really buying is a spot on a particular catalog raisonné. And that spot on the catalog raisonné comes along with a dirty piece of canvas or a lumpy rock, right? And those aren't what's valuable. What's valuable is the fact that they're associated with a spot on a catalog raisonné. Well, that's literally what an NFT is, right? It's a spot on a ledger that's saying this is something that represents some investment of value, right? The Mona Lisa is worth, $100 million, not because it's a really nice picture, but because it's a picture by Leonardo da Vinci, right? And I think the same thing is true here. When people invested in this work that I created, what they were investing in, for better or for worse, was their probably misguided belief that I would be a famous artist in the future. And, is that a security? I don't know. The way my friend Ben Edwards at UNLV describes it, he says, look, there's 4 factors in the Howey test, but you can't forget about the 5th shadow factor, which is this the kind of thing that the SEC believes it's supposed to regulate? And if the answer to that question is no, it doesn't matter if it satisfies the other factors. The 5th one is the one that really matters.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, very, very, very helpful. Thank you. So I want to come back to some of this stuff later, but let's move over to Rob now. And I'd love to hear your thoughts, Rob, on this field.
From a banking perspective, we haven't really touched on the NFT world. That's kind of an interesting novelty we read about right now. But on the broader field of the distributed ledger technology, and then the cryptocurrencies, I think over the last several years, 6-7 years since they kind of first got prominence, not a terrible lot of engagement, but as a financial services organization, we've got customers, and we've got customers today that are demanding banks to provide banking services and some of those services around crypto assets and those types of things. So that's kind of the one focus that we've got in providing those services. They expect, and we have to follow the regulators' guidance around that, so that sometimes that's clear, sometimes that's an uncertain area for doing that. We also have to do it at scale. So those are kind of the crypto avenues of it. On the technology in general, it's fascinating on the solutions that the distributed ledger can provide. Whether it's a public blockchain or more typically in the banking world, we do the private blockchains. They're really designed to solve problems that technology that's decades old haven't solved yet. It's the cross-border problems, it's the multi-party, the self-executing contracts are helpful. So all these activities that are somewhat archaic in the modern world, the DLT technology has provided solutions to that. As an IP lawyer, and particularly a patent lawyer, is the primary focus. It's fertile ground, right? It's grounded in technology, which is the touchstone across any patent system for getting a patent on it. So it's great from that perspective. I think the jury's still out on what the value of the IP is around that technology. We don't know what the enforcement mechanisms are going to be, and whether or not that's going to be promoting innovation or constraining innovation as we do that. Certainly from an implementation standpoint, the banks, most commonly you're going to see pilots. You're not going to see big at scale changes as we go forward. So it's certainly a fascinating area, both from a customer regulatory standpoint and then from an IP perspective as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, super helpful. So just an initial question that bridges from the patent part of the discussion, Rob. So what I'm seeing is increased interest in and prevalence of open source software used as an implementation vehicle for blockchain technology. And of course, when you think of open source software, a lot of this is in GPL, some of it is in Mozilla-based licenses, BSD, MIT-based licenses are coming up also. Do you feel like we're going to find our way back to some of the same issues that we had to work out with, like the Linux operating system and other open source ecosystems that have become very mature and prevalent in the last 20 years, but raised patent related conundrums, if you will, back when those licenses came out and the platforms were new? Do you feel like we're going to be back to a little deja vu there with blockchain based platforms that are implemented largely based on open source software?
I think we are going to see similarities between the cross section between open source and the other patents and the other types of IP. I think we also have learned to come up with some solutions to those problems so that they can develop consistently. And so hopefully in the blockchain space, we've got mechanisms to promote the public use of the lower parts of the stack that help really promote the technologies, and also ability to recognize the proprietary parts that promote the investment and the development of the different players in the process. So I think we're going to see the same issues, but I think we're probably going to move towards solutions a little more quickly than we did.
Yeah, that's a great point, Rob. It feels like, this isn't our first rodeo anymore, right? We've been through something similar. And so we hopefully will find our way as a combined technical business and legal community. It reminds me of one other phenomenon that I've been mulling over in this area, which is the foundational nature, the infrastructural nature, the platform nature for all industries, but including the banking industry of blockchain-based crypto solutions. And whenever I think about a foundation or a platform, I think of a kind of a closing funnel and an opportunity for intellectual property disputes, because obviously if you control the funnel, you control a lot of commerce and a lot of economic opportunity. So any thoughts on whether that a platform nature, which by the way is similar to Linux and other parts of the open source ecosystem that we dealt with 20 years ago, but do you feel like that platform nature of the field is going to cause a focus of intellectual property disputes?
I think that's always the case when we do that. I mean, we see that on even on the commercial side, on the payment side. All right. I mean, pretty soon you focus on a few methods that are the best way to do payments. So I think the platform nature is going to cause problems. I think it's an area that truly we haven't figured out yet. Meaning not as a solution, but it's still too early. The patents are still pending. The solutions aren't out there. People aren't using the platform. So I think we're quite a ways away. But what is interesting is how quickly we move from a sort of nascent technology with very little adoption to something that becomes ubiquitous. I mean, we saw that with the internet, and how quickly does this, does the DLT technology basically become at scale and become part of our daily activities, as opposed to these, one-off cutesy type embodiments that really don't impact our daily lives and have a lot of transactions behind them. So that's what I see the question is how soon is this at scale and becomes just a normal part of everybody's business, as opposed to solving esoteric problems.
Yeah, agreed. And it felt like a few years ago we were doing all industries were doing interesting pilot programs and test cases, and many of them we learned that it kind of worked, but you could have done this a lot less expensively with a relational database or a hierarchical database. And so now feels like we're getting down to where, as you say, Rob, we're ready to go to scale with those solutions that make sense to implement. On a blockchain, generally, you're using crypto or whatever other implementation of blockchain you want.
Right.
Well, let's go over to Cindy. Cindy, you're in yet another position with your in-house presence at a company that's all about crypto. And so talk about what you're experiencing.
Sure. So, I've been an IP attorney for a long time in both private practice and corporate practice as well. I started having an interest in crypto from a personal aspect. My husband started investing, and I think that, that's basically one of the ways that folks get introduced to it. And so before I joined Gemini, that's really how I started getting into and learning about cryptocurrency generally. Being head of IP at Gemini, of course, I am, basically day to day dealing with all of this, understanding blockchain, especially in terms of how it applies to our products. Seeing a lot of the adoption just from the public. And then also with respect to NFTs, as Brian mentioned, especially earlier this year with folks really embracing NFTs in the market, really keeping up with one of our platforms, Nifty Gateway, which is a platform that sells and allows folks to buy digital art. So it's been really exciting. A lot of this is just new news coming out all the time. And like you said, Dave, earlier today, so much, even today, it's very hard to keep up with.
Yeah. Well, so I have one first innocent question. Should I be turning to your husband for investment advice?
Well, a lot of people do, and I tell him that we can't say anything.
Okay, good. Sounds like you've got he's getting good legal advice. Let's put it that way. So, Cindy, I mean, maybe this is a good place to pivot a little bit. And I'd certainly like to hear from all the speakers, but Cindy, let's start with you and back up just a second here, or a level or two. I'm sure that people who are watching this, a lot of folks are going, now I've heard of this NFT thing, but I don't really get how it works or what it might be good for or what use cases it really is designed for. So I wonder if you could just sort of give the elevator speech you give. We're not trying to make like blockchain technologists out of people here, but just talk the way you talk to people you meet at cocktail parties and explain, for if you want to start with crypto and then go over to NFTs or the opposite order or whatever. But I'd just like to make sure people have a bit of a grounding in what we're talking about here and what the use cases are.
Sure. So I'll cover NFT. Happy to do that. It's something that relies on blockchain technology. So NFT, it stands for non-fungible token. That means it's like a cryptocurrency token that contains certain information that's pointing to a single non-swappable asset that might reside on the blockchain. And that's what makes it unique. The information that is associated with an NFT is recorded on blockchain, right? And so typically on the blockchain, especially for NFTs, these blockchains, different from what Rob was mentioning, these blockchains are public. They basically want to be basically transparent so that folks can know exactly what information is on the blockchain. And so with respect to the information that's on the blockchain, sometimes the block on the blockchain can contain a copy or the original digital art that's associated with the NFT. So, if it's a copy, right, it's just stored on the blockchain. Sometimes there's just a pointer to say like a cloud storage address somewhere so that, folks again can know where that digital art is. So I've given examples of NFTs that are related to art, but there are, like you said, Dave, different use cases. You've heard of like Jack Dorsey's tweets. That is something that's right. It's not tangible, but the NFT shows ownership of somebody who paid many millions of dollars to own that. NFTs are also being used as marketing perks, right? And so very similar to like if you had a cereal box and you got a toy from the cereal box, the NFT can sort of act like that too. And it's basically a digital version of that.
Okay, yeah, super helpful. So if I tried to go into a use case now using Brian's dirty canvas metaphor before. So Brian gets a canvas dirty, makes a painting, right, of some kind, and now has obviously that embodiment, the physical thing, which can be then photographed or created originally as a digital asset, but there's still an embodiment, an original embodiment that is stored somewhere, but then also a copyright interest, the right to make copies, to transmit, to make derivative works, all those things that come up in the copyright law. If Brian were to create an NFT, the way I'm thinking about it anyway is the most straightforward NFT would be a non-fungible token that represents the ownership and authenticity of the original dirty canvas that he's created. And that's the thing that then through the blockchain, its authenticity can be forever confirmed. So there's no issue with like fakes or anything. There could be many copies made. That's a different issue, right? And it's an issue under copyright law. It also could be controlled on a blockchain. But the point of the NFT here, at least for this use case example, is that has a special value and can be bought and sold. It represents the original thing that he created when he painted on the canvas. That sort of roughly characterize, how people can think about a non-fungible token?
Yes, yep, that's great.
So super interesting area. And we'll come back to the financial area in a minute, but I just thought here, there is so much news right now. We should just bring a little bit of this into focus. So as recently as yesterday, if I remember right, we saw news break that the Staples Center, the famous arena in downtown Los Angeles, and for anyone who's been there, I've been there several times, beautiful arena right there in the middle of downtown LA. The LA Lakers play there. I think the LA Kings play there, if I remember right. And it was announced that if I'm getting this right, an Australian company called Crypto.com purchased the naming rights to the Staples Center for over $70 million, 70+ million dollars. So they're going to get for 20 years the right to change the name. It won't be the Staples Center anymore. It'll be the Crypto.com Arena, if I understand it right. That is a lot of money. So I would just be interested in really, anyone and everyone's views here about the opportunities that creates. And does this mark a kind of a merging between the entertainment industry and the tech industry, the fintech industry, and a recognition that there is so much power in NFTs and in crypto that owning an arena and therefore getting things like broadcast rights to sports programs and selling tickets and all the things that you could do with that digitally now, through crypto using NFTs becomes a whole new business model that we're just beginning to see unfold. So I'd love, Cindy, Brian, Rob, love to hear your thoughts on what these guys paid $70+ million for. It can't possibly just be the right to put a logo up on a building. I'm sure that certainly is part of it. It's got to be more than that.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, there's basically a spotlight on NFTs and the use of crypto, and it's very prevalent, right? And the news, people are getting very used to it. And I think you're right. I think, there is that additional sort of layer, the ability to use NFTs in different ways and crypto in different ways. I think the reason why this is sort of resonating with a lot of folks now really is because, it's sort of a perfect storm of the type of the generation that's coming up that's been used to, being in sort of that metaverse, right? And so those folks and myself, my son actually included, they've been playing Fortnite, Minecraft, maybe, folks like me playing Sims, used to the virtual world, right? And so also easy to sort of translate that thought of, well, here I'm in the virtual world, I am trading and buying and selling these digital assets that may be, something that somebody else clear on the other side of the globe might want, right? And so there isn't the physical barrier anymore. There isn't a barrier between the physical and the virtual anymore. And so I think that playing on those, the desires of folks to sort of merge the two together and then, publicizing everything that's been going on lately, I think that it's kind of a perfect storm of circumstances that has led to this.
I mean, if I may, I think this is sort of the culmination of something that we've known in our bones for a long time, which is that traditional ways of thinking about property in the physical world have always been a really bad fit with digital assets, right? Because digital assets aren't scarce. And we create artificial scarcity in these assets through copyright and other forms of intellectual property protection, and thereby limit the number of people who can access them for no reason other than monetizing them. Now, monetizing them is a pretty good reason, but it also means that we're not getting as much value, social value, out of them as we could. But we didn't really see an alternative to that before. And what I think, at least this early stage of the NFT market and related markets surrounding it is doing, is awakening us to the possibility of a market for ownership that doesn't require control of the asset. In other words, a kind of a market in pure ownership without the ability to control the use in any way. What I like to think of it is instead of a market for control, it's a market for clout. And it's a market for nothing but clout. And there's always been a market for clout for really rich people who want to do things like get their name in a building, right? What I think is really interesting is that maybe that market, that potential market for clout, for just feeling special because you're associated with something as the owner of it, is a lot deeper and a lot richer than we previously realized. The word I'm starting to use when I think about this is, rather than think about it as ownership, we can think about it as ownership, right? Like in a digital sense, I value being associated with things that I think are meaningful, and I value other people believing that I'm associated with those things in some special way that other people aren't and can't be associated with those things. It's like a pure kind of a Veblen good, right? A pure luxury good. It's a good that says I'm special. It's like a trademark good, right? It's like, and there's no question that people have long valued that. I just think we didn't fully realize how deeply and how broadly they valued that. And at the end of the day, I think this could be a wonderful thing, right? Because if what it means is that we can provide access to digital works without having, like in a sense, we can monetize digital works without having to restrict access to them, that would be really socially beneficial, right? It would mean that people would have all kinds of additional access. It would really mean kind of activating the potential of the digital world in a way that I think was constrained by the fact that the only way we could previously conceptualize monetization was through control rather than through something else, which I think is emerging now. And I wonder whether that maybe isn't only just the first step in much more fundamental radical changes in the way that we think about the distribution, dissemination of ideas and information.
So Brian, I want to go a little further with that. So, and I understand you're a filmmaker, so I'm sure you totally get the, I'll call it frustration that creative people have had. And I'm here in New York City, surrounded by many creative people who express frustration with the lack of control that they have over the output of their creative endeavors. And so I feel like this, like the NFT world, is perhaps, and you used the word control several times, which triggered this thought for me. It is creating a new opportunity for creative people to control the original new works that they're creating. And this is like empowering. It's enlivening to people to have this new way finally to take back some control. And you're nodding your head, so I'd like you guys to speak, but doesn't it feel like there's something going on here that's bigger than just like crypto kitties and stuff?
Yes, very much so. Although I do think that at least at this historical moment right now, there's a real cognitive dissonance for a lot of people who think of themselves as creatives, because they have two incentives that I don't think always perfectly align. And we're at a moment where they may be starting to diverge even more than in the past, right? So there's the incentive of trying to be able to be compensated for the creative labor that you do in a way that facilitates you being able to devote the time and energy it takes to generate works of authorship. And that's sort of, I think, the big hurdle that we've had for a long time in terms of producing creative works, right? It's costly to do so. And we haven't had a good mechanism for compensating people, right? Copyright was, what we've used for hundreds of years now. It was always kind of a kludge, right? It doesn't work that well. It's very inefficient, requires a lot of intermediaries. Artists can't effectively use it themselves very efficiently, right? They need middlemen, they need publishers, they need record companies, labels, et cetera, et cetera. It was very hard for them to activate that themselves, and they ended up not internalizing a lot of the benefits associated with the works that they generated. And I think that this is a moment where artists can sell stuff directly, and that has the potential to be hugely beneficial to them in terms of the economic returns that they receive.
Yeah.
But artists have other incentives too, right? They want to be able to tell people, this is how you should think about me. This is how you should think about the things I create. And this is something to which I have a very special, unique, like kind of important relationship that I want other people to recognize. And I think that some of the backlash that we're seeing to NFTs is authors and people who are related or associated with authors starting to be concerned about a weakening or a fraying of that kind of metaphysical special relationship, especially where so many of the people who are buying these NFTs, especially some of these PFP related projects, come to associate very, very strongly their own personality with the project that they've purchased. And I think that there's a fear on the part of a lot of people that perception of ownership on the part of the buyer rather than ownership on the part of the author is threatening in certain ways, certain kind of conceptual, ideological ways to people who are engaged in creative enterprises. And I think maybe they have to learn how to get over that.
Yeah, great. Yeah, really great comments. Just and such a link to and almost exposing some of the weaknesses or lack of connectivity of the traditional copyright regime with the digital world. That gives us a chance to come back, Cindy, to you, and I'll bring Rob back into the discussion in a moment. But Cindy, you and your son, who you mentioned plays games online. So let me just give an example that links us back into copyright law, and I'd like to get everyone's reaction to it. So right now, if you've got an NFT asset, like a unique skin on Fortnite, an avatar that you've created on Fortnite, you can't move that over to Minecraft. There isn't any way to do that. Those two systems are disconnected. They literally live in different universes from one another. But my understanding is that, you know, one of the things that's magic about blockchain, or that blockchain enables, is to be able to begin moving NFTs between systems. So in this example, to move your avatar or your skin between Minecraft and Fortnite. And I just love to get any comments that folks have on, you know, the sort of the oncoming almost standardization enabled through blockchain that will enable NFTs more generally as a genus of the species of a skin on Fortnite or Minecraft or whatever, to be able to move. You guys have got to be thinking about this at Gemini, Cindy, I would think, to create markets for NFTs to be moving back and forth between different systems. Does this resonate at all with you guys?
So yeah, you know, the view, right, is for folks to be able to own outright the NFT, right? And so to be able to do anything that they want with the NFT, one of which is to move it from a wallet to another wallet that may not be on the same blockchain. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that all protocols that potentially may be involved in, you know, NFT ownership, recording, you know, there just needs to be some sort of ability to be able to translate between the two of them. And there's a lot of research going on in that to make sure that, you know, that's going to be able to be done. Yes, you know, I think that any platform that is going to be providing NFTs for, you know, buying and selling, that's a concern and something that's on folks' minds.
Yeah, I understand, you know, just to stay with the kid stuff for a moment, that's already happening with CryptoKitties as an example, where once a player, they've you know, gotten this working to where once a player owns a CryptoKitty, that she can then breed and buy and sell within the CryptoKitties platform, if you will, or race or dress or battle her CryptoKitty in other Ethereum games. So the technology is coming along in that regard. I don't know if anyone else has any comments on this aspect, but it's just fascinating to me because the connection, again, with copyright law and the digital realm being able to use blockchain to sit kind of on top of copyright law and govern these rights so effectively.
Sure. Yeah, I guess I was just thinking more in terms of, in the previous question, the different types of blockchains. So there are different types of blockchains that that may be involved in NFTs, and so Ethereum being one of them and the most prevalent one. The reason I think why CryptoKitties can sort of move from wallet to wallet is because it's all Ethereum based, and so that's sort of one of those you know, sort of hurdles that folks have already been able to overcome to be able to move you know, a CryptoKitty from one wallet to another. But you're right. I mean, I think that there are sort of some of those layers of copyright issues that come into play as well. And so whether or not, you know, somebody sort of unintentionally copies somebody else's CryptoKitty and like some you know, feature or some artistic creativity that goes into creating or layering on top of a CryptoKitty, you know, some of those permissions may already be in the NFT that they have bought. And so maybe there can be, you know, mechanisms by which to either prevent those types of things from happening, or, you know, there just might be sort of this open permissioning where then folks can do that, right? So that's the beauty, I think, of blockchain, is that you can build these things into the smart contract that is associated with the NFT that you may be buying.
Yeah, great point. And this is why I find myself analogizing blockchain in many ways to open source, in that it doesn't eschew copyright, it doesn't reject copyright, it sits on top of copyright, and it uses copyright as a mechanism to enforce inclusiveness and openness. Just the same way that you know, we saw in open source starting, you know, 25 or so years ago. So great, Cindy, that's a super explanation. You know, I'd like to bring Rob back into the discussion and pivot a little bit to fintech for a moment. So Rob, I think of opportunities in the crypto space that include lending, you know, crypto collateralized loans. I think of clearance for lending and other financial services activities being able to happen much quicker, you know, through blockchain-based technology. Settlements happening much quicker. I think of enormous roles for banks in now, you know, coming back to your comments before, taking to scale those aspects of blockchain and cryptocurrency, especially, that we now know can work in a special way in the digital world versus the way it worked in the physical world. And so suddenly loans that couldn't be made, particularly in underrepresented and disadvantaged and disenfranchised groups, because there wasn't enough information to be able to collateralize a loan, or the risk profile wasn't well enough known, or the risk of the perceived risk of default and forfeiture and foreclosure was too high, you suddenly can work your way through those things in the banking sector, thanks to the cryptocurrency revolution. And I just wonder if you can comment on, you know, what you see as the opportunities in general, and then in particular in making banking services available to whole sectors of the global population that were either underbanked or unbanked up until now.
Yeah, and I you know, and I think another, you know, apart from the blockchain technology, if you add on to that the AI technology, so the idea that you actually know the customer really well, you know everything about them, as opposed to what historically has been a pretty limited slice. What was your employment? Well, that's a pretty narrow slice for somebody that could be very hardworking and have all kinds of things going on, and in fact be a, you know, very low credit risk as you're doing that. But I think that, you know, inherently, I think we, you know, it's a give and take. Are these technology did we solve technology problems, or did we solve legal problems as we're doing this? And I think we've grown up with a legal regulatory framework and a technology framework that's given it limited options to solve a lot of these problems that we have. I think the blockchain technology has opened up the technology solutions. And then the question is are there legal solutions and regulatory frameworks that permit that? I think we see the give and the take. You know, the fintechs do it and ask permission later. The banks ask permission for years, you know, to get to something, and need to have absolute certainty with what the you know, what the result is. And I think that constant tension makes it a little difficult. And I think we're all looking at really what are technology solutions that I think are available, reachable, and doable on that. But I think the uncertainty on the legal side, and then, you know, certainly on the technology side, the scaling issue that gives the banks heartaches all the time. You know, it can't work 50% of the time. 95 is not a passing grade. 99.99999 is a passing grade on some of that stuff. So I think it'll be interesting for we talk about the third world and some of the money transfers for a world that's not used to, you know, having power on 24/7. You know, 90% of the time is pretty good, you know, for getting some of these services that historically would be very expensive, and maybe they are guaranteed, but they're not. You know, there's a nice haircut taken on every, you know, all the intermediaries along the way. So I think I think it'll take a little time, but I think ultimately the goal of the banking and the fintech industry is to remove a lot of the friction for money movement and payments and all that stuff. So I think everybody's got the same interest. The question is how do we get there, and how do we get the technology solutions closer to the 99.9 and with confidence, and how do we get the legal framework that's willing to move quick enough to support those?
Yeah, great comment. Brian, you're nodding your head. Anything resonating there?
No, I mean, I think that I really agree with a lot of that. And I think that one thing I try to keep in mind when looking at these developing markets and blockchain writ large and really recent developments in NFTs is that, you know, I think we really need to keep an open mind about what the technology is, what the technology is for, and what kind of problems it can help us solve. Maybe in some cases, problems we didn't even realize existed before. Like sometimes you need a kind of solution to emerge on its own that helps you see why something was such a problem in the first place, and help you stop taking things for granted that you'd taken for granted in the past. And I specifically, as a copyright scholar, you know, I think this is a moment where we can like just initially take something like copyright and say, is copyright the solution, or was copyright always the problem, right? And are we at a moment where maybe copyright could become less important, and we could think about how to manage assets and how to monetize assets and how to transact in assets in ways that don't require on the kinds of control that we relied on when we did copyright, kinds of control that are really kind of fundamentally in tension with the nature of the medium we're currently working and living in, right? I think one of the reasons that NFTs are kind of having their moment right now is because we live in a virtual world, right? Our interactions are through a virtual world. It used to be and this is such a small part of the market, right? But like it used to be the case that I wanted to buy a painting so I could have it hanging on the wall when people came by my house and they could see it. No one comes to my house, right? 10,000 people a day see me on the internet, right? It's more valuable to me to have things that are meaningful to me displayed to people virtually than it is to have them hanging on the wall in my house, right?
Yeah. Great thought. You know, so coming back, Rob, you mentioned something that caught my attention, the regulatory framework. And it's an area that I've been looking at, working on. I actually put out a paper just recently on this topic of, you know, asking, is it time now for the regulators, you know, at the federal level primarily, to clarify regulation for both the fintech sector writ large, so the fintech companies that grew up starting on the technology side, and for the banks that now want to get into offering fintech services so they can move forward. This is another area as Cindy mentioned before, you kind of have to stay on top of your news feed in this whole field right now. Literally in today's news, I saw two articles that caught my attention. One of them called on lawmakers looking for increased stablecoin, or calling on lawmakers to create increased stablecoin regulations. And then the other article said that was by a federal governor saying that that person was opposed to restricting stablecoins to banks. So I felt like, talk about cognitive dissonance. Those two articles on the same day in the same news outlet were coming at this in very different directions, almost at cross purposes with one another, calling on lawmakers to regulate on the one hand, and on the other hand saying that we're opposing restrictions on stable coins. Both those articles being about stable coins. I wonder if, Rob, we can come back and you could just talk a bit about, in the banking sector, how are you guys thinking about stable coins as a species of cryptocurrency that maybe take some of the excitement out that Cindy's husband can live with and profit from, but maybe the rest of us aren't quite ready for. What's going on with stable coins, and why is it that you got one article saying go regulate them and another article on the very same day, the very same news media saying don't regulate them?
Yeah, I mean, I think stable coins, because by their nature aren't quite Bitcoin, right? They're tied to some stable currency, so the fluctuations are out there. I mean, they become something banks are familiar with, right? Something, it's an electronic version, but it's tied to the US dollar, it's tied to gold. It all of a sudden becomes something that you can model. You got a historical record, you can batch all that. So I think that's got the banks interested. I think it was just recently this summer the Treasury came out with a report that I think said maybe consistent with one of the stories, which is the regulations need to come very, very quickly and in urgency, and let's go run with this, and let's the bank do that. I think the challenge is this are the benefits going to be taken away if you have a regulatory framework that brings us back to a lot of the restrictions we have? On the other hand, the banking system works really well. It provides a lot of confidence, and when you have trillions of dollars moving around, that's what you need. So I think we're going to, again, back to the tension between the fintechs and the banks, which I think the banks explain it simply. Hey, we love the fintechs, just play by the same rules as the banks, and the fintechs say, hey, we can do better than that. We don't need the same rules. We've got solutions that solve the problems that we do that. So I think, unfortunately, it's going to take Congress, I think, in the initial matter for some of these. I mean, they're too new to even fit within the regulatory framework. So I think, for stablecoins in particular, I think Congress needs to act first on that. So it means that it will take a little time, but I think it's, the stable coin is just a proxy for the bigger picture, which is where do the cryptocurrencies in general, where do they fit into the banking community, and how do you make it available out there and become something less than of a novelty and a gamble? And certainly Bitcoin, a lot of folks have done well, but a lot of folks have not done well, and maybe that's not what we expect out of the US dollar or something similar. So where does it fit? Is it a security? Is it a currency? All those issues I think are ripe for resolution, and I think different people are going to have different interests. But I think ultimately, I still come down to, hey, it's a very exciting time, to have these options and the solutions out there, and the fact that Cindy, your husband, could be involved in this, and whole industry that you're working in now that frankly did not exist 10 years ago. It's just remarkable that we've got that type of innovation going forward in an area that, the financial area that historically wasn't, I think the innovations were somewhat limited. If we think back to the 2008-9 timeframe, I mean, those were back office, very complicated, securities that were being transferred that I think moved the system forward. But now we actually can have practical solutions to real people in the financial markets to solve problems that they had. I mean, the fact that we're still wiring money, like Western Union did and the Telegraph did in the 1870s. I mean, that's our basic technology. So I think we're ripe to getting some solutions. The question is how quickly we can get there.
Yeah, that the wire transfers is a great example, Rob, and and it sort of brings you back to the financial inclusiveness and using the crypto and blockchain revolution to empower people who've been very disadvantaged for many times. Many people know, trillions of dollars of money transfers are made from people living in countries like the U.S. and then trying to send money to their relatives overseas, and that the time that those funds take to clear and the charges that are levied, can be very significantly improved with blockchain technology. And I think if it's a good thing, and it would be a good thing for the people who are trying to make those money transfers and their families overseas. So really important point. Look, before we finish, I want to actually just come back, because this is all so much fun, to an entertainment point. You guys have got to have noticed that, I think it was just 2 days ago, this case against Quentin Tarantino dropped, and Brian's smiling. This is amazing stuff. So if I've got it right, and you guys correct me if I'm like missing some of the facts here, Quentin Tarantino takes Pulp Fiction, the famous movie from a number of decades ago, and wants to offer it or scenes from it or parts of it as non-fungible tokens. So again, very interesting business model. Immediately gets sued. So do you guys see this? Is this like a copyright infringement case? Is this garden variety? He just doesn't have the copyright right. I feel the same way, Brian. It feels like this is more complicated. This is like, ownership of an underlying asset set of issues. Can you, just to finish up, can you guys talk about what is going on with this suit against Quentin Tarantino, and how does it relate or not back to copyright?
Well, so as I understand it, Quentin Tarantino is proposing to sell NFTs associated with particular pages from the original screenplay for Pulp Fiction, which in his contract with Miramax, he retained the rights to monetize subsequently. So my guess is that Quentin Tarantino's lawyers have looked at that contract very carefully and decided that he has the legal right to distribute the material in question, presumably with an eye to avoiding copyright infringement. The cynic in me says that the lawyers at Miramax looked at Quentin Tarantino proposing to claim a big pot of money on the basis of Pulp Fiction fans who wanted to be associated with Quentin Tarantino and Pulp Fiction, and thought to themselves, when there's money, Miramax gets it, not Quentin Tarantino. And they're just like looking any way they can to try to get some of that money that they think Quentin Tarantino is going to make. I think they're wrong, because NFTs have nothing to do with copyright. There's no exclusive right to make NFTs in Section 106 of the Copyright Act. Anyone can make an NFT of anything they want to and sell it, and there's nothing that anyone can do about it, so long as they don't actually also copy copyrightable content and use it in a way that the Copyright Act doesn't allow them to. And in fact, I myself created a secret Pulp Fiction NFT containing secret information, which I have already sold on OpenSea. So come at me, Miramax.
That is great. So Cindy, how do you guys think about that issue at Gemini? I mean, Brian puts it in a very vivid way, that this isn't about copyright law. This is like a volcano has erupted and it's created some new land, right? And so Miramax is saying, well, we just want the new land because we had some rights in the old land. Do you guys, what's your thoughts on this from your in-house perspective at a fintech?
Yes, I won't speak on behalf of Nifty, our NFT platform, but just from the IP perspective, I mean, there are so many layers here, right? So you bring in the copyright on the, because there is the copyright to the screenplay. But then there's also, right, the trademark aspect, because there's Pulp Fiction and all of that associated with Pulp Fiction. And so, if there is then ownership by Quentin Tarantino of the trademark, I don't know, but that might be owned by the studio. There might be all of these other things that might be associated with that. And so, like what Brian said, I'm not sure that it's really the NFT itself that is the issue. I think it's really all of the other stuff that is associated with Quentin Tarantino, Pulp Fiction as a brand, and then also the screenplay itself. And so really all of that underlying stuff rather than the NFT.
Yeah, terrific. Do you guys, I mean, just to wind this up then, do you guys feel like we're going to need some kind of new sui generis, right? Kind of like Brian, there's now the copyright reversion right that's become a thing since that kicked in around 2013 or so. After 35 years, right, the original creator gets to reject licenses and take back the copyright. Does it feel like there's some sui generis right like that, or some authors and creators right we're going to need to clear this issue up, or maybe the Tarantino case, Miramax, it'll get sorted out in the courts and they'll figure it out?
I mean, my hope would be that we wait and see rather than jumping to conclusions about a need to formalize or regulate before we really understand the nature of the market and what the new technology is for and how people are going to use it. One thing this entire new set of developments has made me really realize is that I think a lot of regulators have gotten very complacent in their role because they think they understand what they're doing and they think they understand what they're regulating. And I think that a lot of regulators would benefit from taking a step back and reflecting on how new technologies have changed the markets that they're engaging with in really fundamental ways, and to be more open, more transparent, and more self-reflective about what they're doing and why they're doing it.
The copyright area in particular, although my view that is subject to the points Rob made before. When it comes to some of these Howey test points and the fintech marketplace and the role of banks, it feels to me like it's time for the regulators to do their job and to get clear. And it's good to see that they're talking about that a lot in the open news media now. So look, I think we unfortunately have ran out and over our time. You guys, so let me just end by saying this has been a fantastically fun discussion. It obviously could go on a lot longer, and while it spans very diverse industries, one thing we certainly have all got in common is we recognize there is a brand new world that's unfolding on the part of fintech and non-fungible tokens and crypto and blockchain generally. And there's lots of opportunity for investors. Like Cindy's husband, there's also lots of opportunity for kids to get involved. And there's lots of opportunities for us in the intellectual property world to make some good policy, to Brian and Rob's point. So let me just end by saying thank you very much to Cindy and Rob and Brian. You guys have been great. This is such a fun discussion, and I hope we'll be able to keep in touch with IPO Education Foundation because we need your help.